5 years. That's how long it had been since I'd closed the door on that chapter of my life. My ex and I had been together for 2 years. 2 years that taught me more about what I didn't want than what I did. When I left for university, I left him too. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't mutual. I just didn't want to be with him anymore. Simple as that. Now, here I was, 5 years later, living in a different city, engaged to a man who felt like coming home. My fiancé wasn't just my partner. He was my best friend, my safe place, the person who made me believe in soulmates. We had built a life together, and I was genuinely, profoundly happy. So when our doorbell rang at 10 p.m. on an otherwise unremarkable Thursday evening, I wasn't expecting my past to show up drunk on my doorstep. My fiancé answered the door, and I heard it before I saw it. The unmistakable sound of someone falling apart. I walked into the entryway to find my ex standing there, swaying slightly, eyes red and glassy with alcohol and tears. The moment he saw my fiancé, really saw him, he broke down completely, sobbing that he couldn't believe this was actually happening. It was surreal. This man I'd known, this person who'd once been such a significant part of my life, was now a stranger unraveling in my doorway. He didn't look dangerous, just devastatingly sad. Against my better judgment, or maybe because of some residual sense of responsibility for someone I once cared about, we brought him inside. What followed was one of the most uncomfortable hours of my life. He sat on our couch and just talked. It poured out of him in waves of alcohol-soaked confessions. He was still hurt about our breakup. 5 years later, and he was still hurt. He kept saying we could have made it work, that he regretted how he'd treated me, that he'd never really gotten over losing me. The words cumbled out between sobs, incoherent and raw and painfully honest in the way drunk people sometimes are. And then he threw up in our bathroom. My fiancé, bless him, handled it with more grace than anyone should have to muster for their partner's emotional ex-boyfriend. We fed my ex waffles and strong coffee, trying to sober him up enough to get home safely. Between bites, he kept apologizing and crying and saying things that made me deeply, deeply uncomfortable. Eventually, he called an Uber. Before he left, we made him promise to text us when he got back to his hotel. Because despite everything, despite how bizarre and invasive this whole situation was, I didn't want him to die in a gutter somewhere. He texted around 11:30 p.m. Made it back. Sorry. After he left, I stood in my apartment, our apartment, mine and my fiancé's, and felt dirty. That's the only word for it. Like my past had reached forward and smeared itself across my present. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong with this picture. Because here's the thing, my ex was in town for his bachelor party. He was getting married, days away from his own wedding, and he showed up at his ex-girlfriend's apartment, drunk and crying about how he wasn't over her. I couldn't stop thinking about his fiancée, this woman I'd never met who was probably at home planning the final details of their wedding, completely unaware that her future husband had just spent the evening sobbing in another woman's bathroom. The question gnawed at me. What was I supposed to do with this information? I turned to the internet for advice, laying out the whole messy situation. The responses were split almost perfectly down the middle. Some people insisted I had a moral obligation to tell her, that she deserved to know who she was marrying. Others argued it wasn't my place, that I should stay out of it and let them figure out their own relationship. One comment stuck with me. Put yourself in his wife's shoes. Would you want to sign your life away to this person? I thought about it. Honestly, I thought about it. If I were her, would I want to know? Yes, absolutely yes. I would want to know. But I also realized I'd want to hear it from my partner, not from some stranger I'd never met. Having a stranger tell me my fiancé wasn't over his ex days before our wedding, that felt cruel, potentially unbelievable, and maybe even petty looking, regardless of my intentions. After thinking it through, I made my decision. I wouldn't contact the bride directly. We weren't friends, we had no relationship. But I did know his sister. We'd been close once, back when he and I were together. I sent her a message, keeping it simple.
"Hey, your brother showed up at my door last night pretty drunk and distressed. You might want to check in on him and make sure he's okay." She responded quickly, thanking me for letting him know and apologizing profusely. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. Her brother had been acting a fool for weeks leading up to the wedding. She asked if I was okay, if he'd made it back to his hotel, because, and this was the kicker, they couldn't find him. I told her he had texted us at 11:30 p.m. saying he'd arrived safely. She thanked me again, apologized one more time, and that was that. I thought it was over. I thought I'd done the right thing by telling someone in his life without inserting myself directly into his relationship. I thought I could finally let this bizarre episode fade into a weird anecdote for future dinner parties. I was so wrong.
The next day, someone started pounding on our door. Not knocking, pounding. The kind of aggressive hammering that makes your heart jump into your throat and makes you wonder if you should call the police. My fiancé got to the door first, and I heard a woman's voice, shrill and breaking with emotion, demanding to know where that home-wrecking bitch was. My blood ran cold. I knew exactly who it was. I rushed to the door to find my ex's fiancé standing in our hallway, mascara streaked down her face. She looked absolutely unhinged, and I couldn't entirely blame her. The moment she saw me, she tried to push past my fiancé, screaming accusations about how I'd slept with him, how I'd ruined everything. Her voice cracked between rage and devastation as she told us the wedding was supposed to start in 5 hours, and the groom was missing because of me. Neighbors were starting to open their doors, peering out at the commotion. This was rapidly becoming a nightmare. I tried to calm her down, suggesting we talk privately inside, but she refused, convinced I wanted to poison her or eliminate the competition. When my fiancé tried to intervene, she turned on him, demanding to know how he could be sure we hadn't done anything wrong when he couldn't have been watching us every second. "Actually," my fiancé said, and something in his tone made both of us pause. "I was watching him every second. I have proof." He pulled out his phone, and I realized with a jolt what he was about to show her. My fiancé had a security app. We'd installed cameras in our apartment after a break-in scare 6 months ago. The camera in our living room would have recorded everything. She stared at the screen as the time-stamped footage played out. My ex stumbling in at 10:07 p.m., sitting on our couch, sobbing, me in the chair across from him, not beside him, not touching him, my fiancé bringing coffee and waffles, my ex throwing up, my fiancé helping him to the bathroom while I stayed in the living room, my ex leaving at 11:15 p.m., less than an hour and 10 minutes after he'd arrived, me immediately locking the door and collapsing against my fiancé in exhausted relief. The anger drained from her face, replaced by something worse, complete and utter defeat. My fiancé explained gently that everything after 11:30, when my ex texted us from his hotel, had nothing to do with us. She just stood there and started crying, not angry tears anymore, but deep, broken sobs that shook her entire body. Her wedding was supposed to happen, and the groom had simply vanished. A wave of sympathy crashed over me despite everything. I told her I was sorry, that this wasn't about me, that whatever he was running from wasn't me. I explained that I hadn't wanted him back for 5 years, that I was engaged and happy, that this was about his own issues. "Then why did he come here?" she asked, her voice small and lost. I admitted that I didn't know, maybe because I was safe, because the past always looks simpler than it was. But I promised her nothing had happened and that I never wanted any of this. She wiped her face with her sleeve, smearing makeup across the white silk. She told us his best man had said my ex was talking about me all night at the bachelor party, wondering what would have happened if we'd stayed together. Everyone had told him to shut up, that he was just drunk and nervous. She said she should have seen this coming. I told her gently that she couldn't have known, that this wasn't her fault. She let out a bitter laugh, describing how 100 people were waiting, her family, his family, all of their friends, for a wedding that wasn't going to happen. And here she was, standing in a stranger's hallway because she didn't know what else to do.
I offered to send her the footage, told her she could show whoever she needed to show, but promised again that nothing had happened. She nodded slowly, then seemed to really look at us for the first time, at my fiancé's arm around my waist, at the way we stood together as a united front. She said she believed us, apologized for coming like that, admitted she just didn't know where else to go. I told her I understood, even though it really wasn't okay. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, talking about needing to call someone to cancel everything. Her voice broke as she wondered aloud how to even tell everyone. My fiancé suggested she start with her maid of honor, let her help with the rest. She nodded, already dialing as she turned to leave. Then she paused and looked back at me, thanking us for showing her the footage, for not making things worse than they already were. We watched her walk down the hallway, phone pressed to her ear, her whole world crashing down with every step. After she left, I closed the door and just stood there, my heart still racing. My fiancé pulled me into a hug, and I buried my face in his chest. "Thank God you're paranoid about security," I mumbled. He was right when he said that without that footage, and in her emotional state, who knows what she might have believed or told others. Over the next few days, the story unfolded much as I'd expected. My ex's sister called to tell me he had gone to France. The wedding was officially called off. Everyone was furious with him. Then came the surreal phone call about how my ex had confessed to stealing one of my lipsticks during his drunken visit, which felt even more absurd now given everything else. His sister PayPal'd me money for a replacement, though I hadn't even noticed it was missing. I thought that was the end of it. The drama had peaked with his fiancé's confrontation, the wedding had been canceled, and my ex had fled the country. What else could possibly happen? I found out 3 months later.
It was a random Tuesday evening. My fiancé and I were cooking dinner together, laughing about something trivial, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. When I did, that voice, that goddamn voice I hadn't heard after that terrible night, came through the speaker. I froze. I mouthed, "It's him," to my fiancé and put the phone on speaker. He said he needed help. When I asked what he wanted, his desperation was palpable through the line. He claimed he didn't know who else to call. I told him flatly that he could call his family or friends, literally anyone from his actual life. He said he couldn't face them. After what he'd done, his mom wouldn't answer his calls, his sister had blocked him, everyone hated him. I said I wondered why, my voice dripping with ice. Then came the real reason for his call. He was still in France, his wallet had been stolen, and he couldn't make a flight home. He needed someone to help him. I actually laughed. I asked him if he seriously expected me, his ex-girlfriend from 5 years ago, whose doorstep he drunkenly cried on before fleeing the country, whose apartment his abandoned fiancé had shown up screaming, to help him? He tried to downplay it, but I cut him off. How else should I put it? He'd ruined that woman's life, humiliated his entire family, made me part of his mess without consent, and now he wanted me to fund his continued avoidance of responsibility? He insisted weakly that he just needed help getting home, that once he was back, he could sort everything out. "Then call your family and sort it out with them," I said firmly. "Apologize, grovel, do whatever you need to do to make things right. But don't call me. Don't ever call me again." When he kept pleading, I told him what I'd been wanting to say for months. "You're a coward. You were a coward when we were together, and you're still a coward now. You ran from your wedding instead of being honest. You ran to France instead of facing consequences. And now you're calling me instead of facing your family? When are you going to stop running?" Silence. I continued, softer but no less firm, explaining that I couldn't help him, not because I was cruel, but because helping him would just enable more running. He needed to face what he'd done, to make amends with the people he actually hurt. After a pause, he apologized for everything, for how he'd treated me when we were together, for showing up that night, for all of it. I told him I believed him, but that sorry doesn't fix anything. Actions do. He needed to go home, face his family, face what he'd done. That was how to make things right. When he said he didn't know if he could, I told him to figure it out because I was done being any part of his story. I hung up before he could respond. My fiancé looked at me with something like awe, calling my response incredible.
That was exhausting, I corrected, though I felt lighter somehow. I asked if I had been too harsh. He said I was perfect, that my ex needed to hear exactly what I'd said. He pointed out that people who run from their problems always look for the easiest escape route. I was supposed to be that route. Well, I'm nobody's escape route. I'm building my own life with you, and he's not part of it. I never heard from my ex again after that. I don't know if he ever made it home, if he ever reconciled with his family, if he ever dealt with the wreckage he left behind. And honestly, I don't care. That's his journey to take, his mess to clean up. And about the lipstick he stole, I never did replace it. Some things are better left in the past, where they belong.